September 2nd, 1945, 11:47 a.m. Outside the ruins of Yokohama Station, Takeshi Yamamoto, age 13, had not eaten a full meal in 16 months. His rice ration, when it came, was measured at precisely 330 grams per day, often mixed with acorns, sawdust, or whatever filler the imperial government could procure. His sister had died in March. Malnutrition, the doctor said, though there was no medicine to treat it and barely enough energy to bury her. Now Takeshi stood in a line of hollow-eyed civilians watching American soldiers unload wooden crates from the back of a deuce-and-a-half truck with a casualness that seemed obscene. The soldier, a red-headed private with Murphy stenciled on his helmet, was chewing something. Gum, Takeshi would later learn. The American reached into a crate without looking, pulled out a small cardboard box, and tossed it underhand to the first person in line, then another, not weighing them, not counting, not rationing, just throwing food as if it cost nothing, as if abundance was the natural order of things. When Takeshi caught his box, a K-ration labeled dinner, he noticed something that would haunt him for decades. The trash pile beside the truck was 3 feet high with discarded American ration boxes, half empty, some with the food still inside. The soldiers had been eating, and they had simply thrown away what they didn't want. Takeshi looked at the box in his trembling hands and could not reconcile what he was holding with everything the imperial government had told him about the weak, decadent, starving Americans. This is not a story about Bushido versus democracy, nor about the atomic bomb, nor even about battlefield tactics. This is a story about the fundamental mathematical reality that determined the outcome of the Pacific War before the first shot was fired at Pearl Harbor. Industrial capacity translated into caloric superiority. In 1945, the United States was producing 336 million individual ration units per month, enough to feed every man, woman, and child in Japan for 3 days from a single month's American military surplus alone. The Japanese Empire, at its peak production in 1943, had managed to provide 1,850 calories per day to its civilians, a figure that collapsed to 1,150 calories by August 1945, starvation level by any medical standard. Meanwhile, a single American K-ration contained 3,000 calories. One American soldier's daily food allotment exceeded what an entire Japanese family received. The war was not won on courage. It was won in the sprawling factories of Hershey, Pennsylvania, and the mechanized slaughterhouses of Chicago. For Takeshi Yamamoto, and millions like him, food had become the central organizing principle of existence. By 1944, the Japanese government's foodstuffs control system had reduced urban civilian rations to a daily allocation that consisted of 330 grams of rice, often adulterated with inferior grains, 15 grams of fish or meat, when available, which was rarely, and negligible amounts of vegetables. Families scraped tree bark, boiled grass, and cultivated every square inch of available land. Even the grounds of the imperial palace were converted to vegetable gardens. Children were sent into the mountains to gather acorns and chestnuts. Protein became so scarce that silkworms, traditionally protected for textile production, were consumed en masse. Takeshi, S. mother, Keiko, kept a diary that survived the war. Her entry from February 12, 1945 reads, "Fumiko, Takeshi's sister, has stopped speaking. She sits by the window and no longer asks for food. I think she knows there is none to give. The government radio says the Americans are eating leather and surviving on grass because our submarines have cut off their supply lines. If this is true, why do they keep coming? Why do their planes never stop? What do they eat that makes them so strong?" The propaganda was specific and pervasive. Radio Tokyo broadcast detailed accounts of American starvation, of riots in New York over bread shortages, and of soldiers in the Pacific reduced to eating coconuts and insects. The message was clear: endure a little longer and the Americans will collapse from within. They cannot sustain their war effort. They are too soft, too individualistic, and too divided to maintain the logistics of total war. Takeshi believed this absolutely. When he watched B-29s cross the sky, he thought, those men are starving. They are desperate. They will break soon. What Takeshi could not see, what no Japanese civilian could comprehend, was the staggering machinery of the American food production and distribution system. At the center of this system was the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Edmund B. Gregory, which had transformed American agriculture into a weapon of war as deadly as any bomber or battleship. Consider the numbers that defined American logistical reality. In 1944 alone, the United States produced 14.6 billion pounds of processed food specifically for military rations, not including the separate civilian food supply, which remained largely unrationed compared to Axis nations. The Wrigley Company was contracted to produce 630 million sticks of chewing gum annually for military rations. This single luxury item exceeded the total sugar ration available to all Japanese civilians combined. The Hershey Chocolate Company produced 3 billion Ration D chocolate bars between 1940 and 1945, each bar containing 600 calories and designed to be consumed as an emergency meal replacement. Daily production of K rations at the Cracker Jack Company facility in Chicago, 500,000 units. That single factory in a single day produced more packaged meals than the Japanese military could distribute to its entire China Expeditionary Army in a week. The nerve center of this operation was the Philadelphia Quartermaster Depot, a facility spanning 1.2 million square feet, where Brigadier General Frank S. Ross oversaw the assembly, packaging, and shipment of rations to every theater of war. The depot operated 24 hours a day, with 3 shifts of workers, many of them women, who packed, sealed, and labeled rations with industrial precision. A single conveyor line could process 15,000 K rations per hour. Each K ration was a marvel of nutritional engineering and industrial efficiency. The dinner ration that Takeshi held contained 1 can of processed meat, ham, pork, or beef, 4 compressed graham crackers, 2 sugar tablets, 3 dextrose energy tablets, 1 fruit bar, 1 packet of soluble coffee, 4 cigarettes, 1 stick of chewing gum, a wooden spoon, a can opener, toilet paper, and water purification tablets. Total weight, 29 ounces. Total calories, 3,000. Cost to produce, 43 cents. By September 1945, the U.S. Navy's Transport Service, under the command of Vice Admiral William Callahan, had established a supply line across the Pacific that delivered an average of 847,000 tons of food per month to forward positions. Liberty ships, each carrying 10,000 tons of cargo, arrived in Japanese ports every 18 hours. The 11th Airborne Division, which was among the first units to occupy Japan, brought with it enough rations to feed not only its own 11,000 soldiers for 90 days, but also an additional 200,000 Japanese civilians for 30 days as a contingency measure. The American soldiers distributing food to Japanese civilians in September 1945 were not engaging in carefully calculated rationing. They were engaging in surplus disposal. The occupation forces had been oversupplied, and the food had to go somewhere before it spoiled. Takeshi brought the K ration home to his mother with trembling hands, convinced it was a trick, a test, or perhaps even poisoned. The box was unopened and pristine, the cardboard printed with bright colors that seemed impossible in a world where everything was gray and brown and broken. His mother stared at it for a full minute before she carefully, reverently opened it. What happened next shattered every assumption that had sustained them through years of war. The can of meat, pork luncheon meat, the label read, was larger than their weekly family ration. The crackers were uniform, machine-made, and individually wrapped. There was sugar, there was coffee, there was chocolate, and there were cigarettes, 4 of them, included as if they were as common as air. Keiko began to cry, not from joy, but from a kind of existential horror. "This is 1 meal," she whispered. "This is 1 meal for 1 soldier for 1 day." The next morning, Takeshi returned to the distribution point, and this time he watched the Americans more carefully. He saw them eating their own rations casually, without ceremony. He saw them throw away half-eaten chocolate bars. He saw 1 soldier, a tall man with a southern drawl, open a can of meat, smell it, make a face, and toss the entire can into the trash. "Ham and eggs again," the soldier muttered to his companion. "I swear to God if I eat 1 more can of this shit." Takeshi stood frozen. The American had thrown away a can of meat, perfectly good meat, because he was bored with it, because he had eaten so much meat for so long that it no longer pleased him. That evening, a group of Japanese civilians gathered around a former Imperial Army officer named Captain Hiroshi Tanaka, who had been repatriated from China. Someone asked him if he had known about the American food supplies during the war. Tanaka, who had spent 3 years fighting in Manchuria, stared at the ground and said quietly, "We knew. The officers knew. In 1943, we captured an American supply depot in Burma. We found warehouses full of food, canned meat, chocolate, coffee, and fruit. We ate for 3 days and could not finish it all. We thought it was a special cache, meant for their generals, perhaps. We did not understand that every American soldier ate like that, every day. We could not conceive of such abundance. We were told it was propaganda." "And now?" someone asked. Tanaka looked at the pile of empty K-ration boxes beside the American truck, the casual waste, and the surplus that was being given away for free. "Now I understand why we lost," he said. Takeshi Yamamoto survived the war and lived to age 86. He became a teacher, and every year he told his students the same story, about the day he received a K-ration and realized that Japan had never had a chance. By the time the war ended, the United States was producing more military food in a single month than the Japanese Empire had produced in an entire year. American soldiers were discarding more calories as waste than Japanese soldiers were consuming as rations. Total U.S. military ration production, 1941 to 1945. Asterisk, 1.3 billion individual ration units. Total Japanese military ration production, 1941 to 1945, 412 million units, estimated as Japanese records are incomplete. Average daily caloric intake, Japanese soldier, 1945, 1,600 calories. Average daily caloric intake, American soldier, 1945, 4,758 calories. Pounds of food shipped to the Pacific Theater by the U.S., 1942 to 1945, 3.4 billion pounds. Pounds of food imported to Japan from occupied territories, 1942 to 1945. 180 million pounds, a figure that collapsed to near zero by 1945 as shipping lanes were severed. In 1991, an American journalist interviewed Captain Tanaka, then 83 years old, and asked him what lesson he had taken from the war. Tanaka's response was published in his obituary 6 years later. "We were told that spirit would overcome material, that our willingness to die would defeat their desire to live comfortably, that our rice and our discipline would outlast their excess and their weakness. But the Americans did not fight us with weakness. They fought us with so much strength, so much abundance, that they could afford to waste more than we could afford to consume. They threw away more food than we had. They discarded more ammunition than we manufactured. They lost more trucks than we built, and they did this casually, without thinking, because to them it was normal. We were fighting a war of scarcity against an enemy who had never known scarcity, who could not even imagine it. How do you defeat an enemy who can afford to throw away half of what he has and still overpower you with what remains? You cannot. We learned this too late. Courage without resources is not heroism. It is only a slower way to die. The war in the Pacific was not won by superior tactics, better training, or greater morale. It was won in the slaughterhouses of Chicago, the wheat fields of Kansas, and the canning factories of California. It was won by an industrial capacity so vast that its surplus alone could feed millions. When Takeshi Yamamoto held that K-ration in his hands on September 2, 1945, he was not holding a meal. He was holding the compressed, packaged, industrialized proof of why Japan had lost. The truth was stamped on every can, printed on every wrapper, and sealed in every box. America had not merely defeated Japan. America had fed Japan, and it had done so with its leftovers.